if we're going to be talking about open banking, and if we're going to be talking about customer centricity and user journey, a word that we talk about a lot, but rarely embodied, I would say, in the way a company grows. Well, Simple has been the opposite of that, and a maverick in the very beginning, and a Canadian fintech startup that has gone global. So Paul, I know your journey didn't start here. You've been in the SaaS world for a really long time. If I bring you back on memory lane, when was the first time you kind of realized that there was a massive opportunity in the change the technology was making around finance?
Well, I started, as you mentioned, Bianca, in the early days of software as a service, I think back in 2000. So that's where I first fell in love with helping clients in their journey using products and technology. And I think the thing that was interesting about cloud was it created this pervasive accountability between the company and the client. You actually had to make sure they were successful and they got their outcomes, otherwise they would just leave. And so that really was, for the next 20 years, is where I spent my life trying to help clients use software and technology and make sure they're successful. And when COVID hit, I had an opportunity to take a little break, and I ended up connecting with the CEO of Wealthsimple, Mike Katchen, who's someone who I've known for several years. And he said to me, we're trying to do something.
The nice thing about the Toronto ecosystem scene, right, is kind of like, I tell that to fintech founders, you usually know each other, which is how we know each other.
Absolutely. That's exactly true. And not just in Toronto, but the ecosystem in general, I think around the world is very small. But I really, really loved the mission that they were trying to achieve, which is to provide financial freedom for everyone, provide access, democratize access to some of these financial products that traditionally have been only accessible by the sophisticated or the wealthy. I really, really love that mission, and I love the team. And we both thought there was a lot of interesting carryover from my work and client experience in the B2B world to the B2B fintech world. And that's when I joined late last year.
You've been on a rocket ride, which is crazy. You guys have just gotten a recent announcement of some serious investing, making records around the Canadian fintech scene, which makes me just even more proud and excited to say I know you guys, but actually to show the opportunity at hand. We know the Canadian banking sector perhaps has not evolved as fast as some of the places like Brazil and certainly like the UK. What has it been like for you being in Wealthsimple, looking at opportunities? You guys started with the mission of, I love it, making people be financially free and have access to things that were traditionally for wealthy, which I think is at the core of what a lot of this legislation around open banking is how do we remember, all of you, that this is for people, for the human. When you look, you talked about your story about starting in the B2B space and bringing that on. What are some of maybe the principles or the way you think about this, that you've seen that portability of that knowledge and that creation of value?
Well, I think at the heart of it, this becoming more accessible and also simplifying allows the mass population to adopt things and not be scared of like getting involved in wealth management or trading early. And I think a lot, and you know this, like the Canadian banking scene is very, very sort of set in its ways. 89% of the market share is owned by the big five banks. The infrastructure is really challenging to get integrated into, and it's really hard to get a banking license. And so there's a lot of historical kind of, I guess, I'd call it innovation slowdown naturally built into the system. And so what's interesting about Wealthsimple is that I think we now have about 58% brand awareness, which is very rare for a fintech in Canada, because most people still just traditionally trust the banks. And so that gives us an opportunity to have a stronger voice in the discussion, both with the larger players, but also with regulators on like, how do we start improving the experience for clients across Canada? And I think I was in a conversation with the bank the other day, and I think in trying to improve our relationship and how we integrate, we use, for example, Flinks and Plaid today for some of the access to bank linking. And I think what's not known is that although we do have a lot of money that transfers out from banks to Wealthsimple, there's a large tens of $millions moves back on a regular basis as well. And so really this idea that it's a win-win if we can support an infrastructure that allows people to control their money, control their data in a consumer-facing way. And I think that we're just starting the cusp of that sort of conversation, I think, in Canada.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad that the conversation is starting. Some of the people being part of Open Banking Week here are talking about sort of what is the initiative in Canada and putting some context for the viewers out there. But when you think about that change in experience and that change in priority, I think you mentioned it around the context of it's not just one, congratulations, by the way, again, 58% market share. That's pretty impressive. And I think it goes
Brand awareness.
Brand awareness.
Yeah.
Okay, 58% of brand awareness. That's pretty impressive in the sense that most people don't know what fintech is. There's still that world that we live in that people are just, or don't really understand what the power of it resides. When you look at that success, what are some of the things that you thought that you think were taken into consideration to build a customer-centric offering, brand, service? What are some of the aspects that you consider are contributing to that awareness shift?
I think there's a couple things, and having been newer, I have to say that much of the hard work was done by the founding team here, Wealthsimple, and the people. No, I am standing on the shoulders of giants for sure. I think there's an opportunity because they're newer. 2014, they could build this financial product and platform with the sort of ground up, with nothing incumbent them or holding them back from providing an experience that truly is what modern banking should be all about. And so this idea of both focusing on the client and a relentless focus on simplicity, I think, has been the primary drivers of how they've gotten so many people to start with sort of digital banking, digital trading, and investments. I also think they've taken a very friendly approach in the brand. And they probably invested in that way earlier than most would think to really get that trust level with clients that, it's hard to get because it's your money. It's really personal. And so I think that focus has probably been a little controversial compared to some other fintechs who focus on the technology and the value, but they actually did as much on the brand, reputation, and friendliness and simplicity of the product as other things. I think that's really made them successful, or made us successful, I should say now.
I can edit that. You can say made us successful. It's all good.
Yeah.
When I look at when I look at those as ingredients, like certainly to me, a bit biased, but it reinforces a belief that I have that there's an emphasis around the technology terms. And we even experienced this. You and I have both worked with banks before in our previous lives, and you still do now, and so do I. But there's a lot of tech talk and not a lot of really deep understanding. When you look at that journey to bring the consumer to understand what you're offering and why you're fundamentally unique and why they should trust you, because we are in a business of kind of actually hopefully bringing transparency and trust into the system again. What are some of the tactics or some of the emphasis that you and your role now are thinking about that are required to bring the customer from that 58 to 100, or from really changing that perception of this is what my wealth assistant or my bank has the role to do? Like, what are some of the tools you're looking at in your current role to get that next level of growth and change?
It's really interesting. And so this is probably something that's always, financial literacy and understanding and education awareness is like a huge part of what we care about. And there's a lot of internal discussion on like, yes, we've invested in content. Yes, we've invested in learning. Yes, we have humans. We have actual humans here at Wealthsimple. We have portfolio managers who actually can give advice and actually help that way as well. But more and more, we're also thinking, like, I'll give you an example. I think and this is public knowledge. I think in January, we onboarded 40% of all the new discount trading clients in Canada in 1 month. Like 40% of everyone who signed on and came to Wealthsimple, and many of them, the majority of them, were new to trading. And you could argue that, that we don't provide any advice on that part of our platform, but you could argue that process and then getting exposed to trading for the first time is maybe the best financial education they could get comparatively to watching a video or reading an article. And we obviously want to make sure that they're being mindful and being smart about how they use their money. but maybe providing that product access is actually one of the best way to distribute that knowledge than ever before. Another example is like, and this is something that again I think is set deep in like the Wealthsimple mantra, is that today over 90,000 clients today have an account with our invest product or wealth management product, and they wouldn't qualify at other robos or bank or wealth management firms in Canada because they don't have enough assets. And so again, letting them start really early in that journey, even if they only have $10 or $20, starts that process for financial literacy and ultimately which helps them get to financial freedom, I think.
Yeah, and that's a big sort of, you're looking at the market in a long-term approach, which I think goes along the lines of what you refer to about, yes, we're a fintech, yes, we're growing like crazy, but there is money and enough abundance in the ecosystem that is not only that you're migrating and onboarding all these clients, but they eventually go back to certain other parts of the ecosystem. When you look at that trust building and that non-so binary relationship of a fintech and the banking sector, and the future of the banking sector being like, I'm a competitor or I'm actually a partner. How do you navigate that when a lot of banks and a lot of the narrative around finance is still about my customer? How does Wealthsimple think about that in the context of a world that is just getting more and more connected?
I think that it's really important as we think about the sort of the future experience that, you know, we take a very transparent approach to providing both access to information and also how we run our business. And I think that ultimately what we believe is that we need to earn our clients' business in any one of our product lines based on value and outcomes they receive. And to your point, it's not as much of like we've captured your data, therefore we have you captive. It's if we feel like every day we have to earn that business back. And it's okay if some of the business moves away, goes back to another bank, another option for a while. Our job is to figure out, well, how do we continue to provide more value to get them back? And so I think that approach allows for a very, both a very beneficial environment for the clients, a more competitive environment. And hopefully we'll see that banks start to realize that that is actually ultimately the way the market needs to move to if they're going to continue to stay competitive. And I think that's what's going to happen in Canada.
Yeah, I think this is what open banking is paving the way from a regulatory framework to allow us to do. But when we kind of think about it, it's not a surprise, at least not to people that live and breathe this space, that consumers don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, my bank. They wake up thinking about their experiences. They wake up thinking about the things that they're now able to do that they weren't able to do because of perhaps the bank, perhaps a fintech, or a big technology company. You lead up the team of Invest. And one of the things you just mentioned to me that stuck with me that I want to maybe dig on is around changing the barrier of entry, which I think it's something connected to our open banking conversation. A lot of the promise around this is uncovering niche markets and including people that are previously not active in whatever form of financial life, whether it's investment or whether it's having right credit management tools. How are you doing that at Invest? And what allows you from a technology perspective, perhaps, to be able to give these kinds of services to people that, if I didn't understand wrong, wouldn't qualify otherwise?
I think there's two things, and also give a very specific example, something that I'm proud of we're doing that I think is not so much just us, but what technology allows you to do, right? I think this is where the tech piece enables an onboarding process, a KYC process, even to some extent, some level of suitability, so that you can take a certain amount of money and put it in the right risk portfolio for a client based on their goals, right? And I think not having to have a human talk to every single person every step of the way allows us to serve people who don't have a certain amount of assets. And so the technology is giving us that advantage and providing that access, and then the client can get the advantage of starting early. One thing that we recently and launched is our Wealthsimple Foundation. I mean, it's been out for a while, but we've relaunched it because here's a great example of access. Like today, there's this program called the Canada Learning Bond. So it is anywhere between $500 and $2,000 can be given per child to help with post-secondary education. You don't actually have to contribute to your RESP at all. Like it's not well known, It's not a matching program. It's actually just you get it if you qualify for certain criteria. There is $2 billion of undistributed bonds in Canada. Imagine how many kids that could help with their education. And so we're starting a program to use our fees from our RESP. And I don't want this to sound like a promo. Like I'm just more about giving access, like to drive that bond money into children's education so they can become more financially aware, they can build better lives for themselves. And ultimately that's what we want to try and achieve. And I think open banking plays into that because we don't know who those families are today. Like we have to market and say, hey, did you know this is around? But it'd be great if we could understand that as a financial services group and figure these are the families we need to help with this $2 billion that's sitting in a war chest somewhere. That would be great.
Totally, which is like crazy idea. That's my love for technology is around where it hits humanity. It hits the real consequence and impact. And you see that this, yeah, it is possible. The cost of acquisition is lower. The opportunity to service is higher. There's real-time settlement. They'll actually get the funds. All these promises around the idea of the infrastructure being ready and able, which I think fintechs have obviously been digitally nascent for the most part, and having the opportunity to be that nimble. That's super interesting in your foundation. Congratulations again. That's super cool. We'll have to go back to that on without being on camera because I want to know. I want to get involved.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's what people need to do. If I switch gears, a lot of the conversation around user experience, digitizing the user experience, what's the future of user experience, is seamless, a lot of buzzwords thrown around. What's a bit of your professional view when you look at how do you compete in this world when, I don't know, you have to pretty much connect to anything and it has to be seamless. You have to look at things like conversational banking. Where are you looking at, Paul, when you're trying to transform the future of the client from Invest or Wealthsimple?
There's a couple things I'd say. One is that, and you would know this as well, that the expectations of the consumer today on the user experience are higher than ever before, right? Whether you call it consumerization of the enterprise or all these modern day social applications, there's been this real pressure to like not just have an experience that works, but experience that delights in a very short time frame. And so I think from ground up, we've built a team here, both focused on user research, on product-led strategies that said that we had no option. We have to be able to capture that interest right away to start gaining traction. And so it's kind of part of the ethos of our product engineering and design teams to take that approach. I think the part that actually is the hard work that maybe isn't shown is that to create a simple experience, you have to spend a lot of time in the financial service industry here in Canada building the infrastructure to support things like money movement and identity and all the things that, to actually simplify is where the bulk of the work is. And without that sort of below level focus, you really can't provide that really delightful experience. And I think that's been the secret sauce here at Wealthsimple.
When you look at these technologies that you're continuously evaluating to kind of keep track of the fact that people are not comparing you, as we said, to the latest banking experience, they're comparing you, whether subconsciously or not, to any of the experiences digitally that they had. What are you looking at to continue to innovate? Tell us a little bit more about your role there and how you're building a team to look at this. Like, obviously, I'm assuming there's a huge component around integration of data and learning from the insights, but perhaps tell us a little bit more about what you're working on.
I think one of the reasons that I was brought on board in November was to bring together the entire client experience organization, which is actually 3 different teams, into sort of one cohesive view of the client journey. And of course, like the first thing I did was when I came in, I said, it's not just that, it's everything the client sees, from the very first advertisement they saw to the product to the people they talk to. And so the first thing is that we wanted to try and take an approach that says we need a leader who's in charge of understanding these different aspects. And then one of our core themes this year is fast feedback loops to the organization. For a company our size, it's incredible actually how fast this engineering team can move to improve things for the client and make their experience better. And we actually have a dedicated team that drives a lot of that feedback and role to, it's actually something similar to a role that Shopify had called product specialist. So this person sits within my organization, but is a partner to the product and engineering groups, and really spends a lot of time driving that feedback, making sure that the client is represented at the right points through the product lifecycle. And it's something that we're lucky to have because we can have a team that can afford to have these extra people in CX. But I think it's been a big difference for us in making the experience better.
When you look at that kind of talent, that's fundamentally breaking a bit of how a lot of traditional, at least financial services products, would be measuring the client experience. A lot of measurements today still revolve around NPS scores being built and measured, and not particularly to a product set or to an experience of a journey, but to the overall brand. How are you thinking that this open, connected future is going to impact how you have that pulse on, is my client effectively thinking I'm valuable today? How do you kind of spot and look at these trends and patterns? What are you thinking for the future on this topic?
I mean, that's such a great question, because I think you're right. Traditionally, the metrics to gauge client stat are either surveys or they're very what I call internal focus metrics. And like, I'll give you a great example. Like
connected to usually internal KPIs.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
is like, is that the market or is that your internal scorecard? We gotta match that.
Yeah, and I think you are right that is shifting. I mean, a great example is that in an era where we can share data more openly and we understand the customer outcomes better, withdrawing from our invest product may be actually an incredible outcome milestone. Like maybe that money is being used to purchase a house, and we actually were successful rather than thought of as a negative financial event for us. It is actually a very positive event where we've helped that person save over 10 years towards their first home. And so I think the lens of the customer outcome is what I'd love to see come more into our metric view. And again, in an open banking world, we'll be able to see more of those potential financial outcomes be positive versus the sort of internal negative view that we may have today on what we can see.
And I hope more of these conversations happen and take place on people understanding that importance of what value will the client attribute to you or trust you with if what he's getting is another offer of, why are you not investing? And you're like, I just bought my home. The example you said that is so simple of celebrating. And I think I've seen enough bank slogans in my time to say that they celebrate people's life's experiences and moments, but oftentimes the product teams or the silos of the bank are motivated and structured around the measurement of client wallet share and looking at journey on channels. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for people out there thinking about how to be more like a fintech, perhaps, and more customer centric? Does it start there? Like, where did your journey start? Even though a lot of the foundation was laid out before you got there, and it was technology and data driven, probably from its inception. What perhaps are some of people out there thinking, oh God, we gotta step up the game. User journey is not that great. We don't get surveys back on our NPS score. Where did they start in your role?
Well, I think that's where the B2B part of my experience building product companies in two sort of emerging markets are sort of has been brought into the financial services world. Because in the B2B world, if you don't focus on client outcomes, like what they expect they're going to get by using your product or service, and drive to that very hard as the real end goal for the metric you care about, then you aren't successful. And so if you almost like were to come in the financial services world, I'm treating it almost like an emerging market, even though in many cases we are replacing things that already exist. And when you take that approach of saying, okay, this is an emerging market, people haven't used technology this way to do banking, then that outcome focus view is really important, right? And in some cases, we have some products where maybe there may be new use cases that you can't do to bank just because of the lack of technology or integration. And so we need to be mindful of that. And that's where those new pockets of value can be. So I think it's really taking that outcome view mindset I had in building markets in the B2B world that's really helped us be more successful. We started to, at least in my short tenure here, in the B2C world.
Well, I'm sure there will be even more learnings that you'll bring to this team. When you look at the skills required to build, a bulletproof future of customer experience, team, what are some of the skills or the technologies or the behaviors that you're looking for to transform from within and kind of keep that pulse on what matters to the client?
I mean, obviously, you would first say a focus on clients. Like we hire a lot of people maybe who don't have financial services backgrounds, but have retail experience, for example. So that ability to really empathize with the client, understand their needs. I think for me, the hardest part at my level in an organization that's growing this fast is the balance between short-term sort of tactical must-do things versus the cycle to make sure we're improving things for the longer term, and what I call focusing on important non-urgent things. And I think that skill in the client world, everything's always urgent, but it's not always important. And so it's like, how do you like dice out the things that are important but non-urgent and make sure those things get done? And we're lucky in that we actually have an operations team that's dedicated to CX. So yeah, it's 100% dedicated to CX and can help me work on those important non-urgent things to allow us to continue to scale at the pace that we're growing and serve the clients where we need to.
So there is a tip for the people out there listening on organizational structure, and maybe some people watching out there will be coming to their CEOs being, I need an operationals team to grow fast and care about the client.
Hopefully my CFO isn't.
The FTs.
Yeah, I was saying, hopefully my CFO isn't listening. I don't know if she knows how big that team is right now, but you know, it's really been really helpful to have that team, because as you know, like if you just focus on, if you don't have them, then you're always just focusing on the tactical client urgent demands of today, which is important, but doesn't help you move forward.
I'm going to ask you a bit of a perhaps glass half full question in terms of what are some of the challenges on this journey? Like perhaps to us is obvious, the customer is what matters. Finance is there to technically make people's lives better. If we go back to the reason for banking back in the day, some shady pasts, but overall has helped build the arts, build societies, finance, interesting things, science. When you look at the role of a finance institution in somebody's life, and you kind of look at this, what are some of the challenges that today you're facing on getting there? Are there any regulatory constraints that are not moving at the speed of the market or the need of the client?
I mean, I think regulation and compliance is super important and actually protects the consumer in many ways. And we work really well with our governing bodies. I do think that maybe I'll explain what we're seeing happening in the landscape is that, you know, today you have kind of like a do your DIY investor over here. Maybe they're using our trading platform. We provide no advice. And then you have our, you know, discretionary manager client where we manage all their investments and invest, and we do suitability and all the things we need to do to make sure that their risk is appropriate to their needs. But I'm beginning to see a client in the middle who kind of wants a hybrid. They want to choose some of their own ETFs, for example, but they don't want to do rebalancing and they don't want to auto deposit into the right asset allocation every month. And so, but they still want a lot of choice. And so today, I think we're kind of stuck. We're not sure, like, is there a regulatory body that actually manages that type of investor? Because if it's invest, we have to do civility, but if it's in trade, we can't give them advice. So I think that's an interesting scenario where we may need to see an evolution of a new type of investor who's more savvy, but doesn't want to do everything themselves.
I think that evolution is like coming at full speed. So it's interesting to hear, even on the more traditional ways that investors are qualified. But when you look at the digital asset space and digital bank currencies and other things, how will you even regulate if I really want my NFT in my wallet and this is considered that I'm saving? How will I make sure that this digitized asset is there on my wealth in my future if it's part of my sort of freedom path? I think that there's a lot of work still to be done, which is part of why we come together and have these discussions and bring people across the world around Open Banking Week to give perspectives and say, hey, let's talk about this in a more global level, as we are global digital citizens, I think, in the future.
Absolutely.
Paul, is there anything that you want to leave us with in terms of thoughts or any questions that you wanted to cover that I haven't? We've covered a lot of the questions on both the sheets, but in a different way.
Well, I mean, I would just say this, like, I'm super excited about what you are helping run with the Open Banking Conference, because truly, if you think about, especially Canada, who, we have international banks out of Canada, but really, if you take a look at the global scene and what you're bringing together, all these constituents to have this conversation, it truly becomes so clear that we have to adopt and move to an open banking infrastructure. And for me, that's what gets really exciting. And I know we have a lot of plans to be more than just Canada as well. So looking forward to seeing the conference and seeing all the great discussions that are happening there.
Thank you for that desire and that wish and manifestation. I think that's the whole ethos of this organization is how do we have the humility to learn from each other and move this thing in a faster pace, in a secure manner, not make mistakes, hopefully deal with identity if I have anything to do with it, and make people, as you said, free to be people, to be creative, to be open, and to create value to hopefully a society that we can all be proud of having been a part. Paul, I really appreciate your time. I wish, well, simple, honestly, a crazy ride, even bigger than it is now, because I think I don't want to read another news that says, can Canada have fintech giants? Canada does. So for anybody out there, go check out Well Simple. We'll leave Paul's comments and handles if you're interested in hearing more. And I cannot wait to welcome you guys in Latin America when the time is right.